Hello and welcome to part 1 of step 8. So in step 7, we have a nice foundation now of how can we do one reflection or one rotation, one translation on our graph. In step 8, we're going to take it one step further and do maybe a reflection and then a rotation, or a reflection and a translation, or maybe even 2 reflections, some sort of combination of 2 of them instead of just one now. Okay, so we're going to add kind of a layer of difficulty there. So this first one we're going to talk about is what's called a glide reflection. Okay, a glide reflection specifically is when we translate something, our figure, and that is followed by a reflection. So a translation and a reflection is specifically called a glide reflection there. Okay, so let's do one of these and get some practice. So I already wrote out my coordinates for this first one. Okay, it says triangle JKL and it lists the vertices. We have to graph JKL, and then we need to translate it and then reflect it in the y-axis. So I'm going to go ahead and graph it real quick. So 1, 2, there's J. Okay, and oh wow, I wrote that so far away. All right, so we have this nice little triangle. Okay, and our first thing we're going to do is translate. Okay, so this is the first thing, and then our reflection is the second thing. So if we're translating along the vector 0, 4, remember the first number changes our x's, which would just be x plus or minus 0, which doesn't change the x, so our x is staying the same. Our y is going to be added to 4. Okay, so if you are one that likes to write out the coordinates, okay, feel free to pause the video if I'm moving a little too quickly, but feel free to write out the points. If you're a visual person, you don't need to write out the coordinates, because you'll get the same answer either way. So J would move to 6 stays the same, -1 plus 4 is a positive 3. Okay, K is moving to 10, 2. And L would go to 5, 1. Okay, and just to double check, we can always just count the blocks 4 up. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then our next part would be to reflect in the y-axis. Okay, this is a point where a lot of people make a mistake. So we are doing 2 transformations, but we're not doing both transformations to the starting object, our pre-image. So like for me, my first one is pink, my intermediate step, my middle one is blue. I don't go back to the pink one. We don't start over, okay? We are now moving on to the blue one and reflecting the intermediate step, not the original. We're now going to reflect the one that we translated, okay? So if you like the shortcuts, if you remember, if we're reflecting in the y-axis, we change the sign of our x. Okay, so we're just going to go through and change the sign of all the x coordinates. So -6, 3. K would be -10, 2. L is -5, 1. Okay, if you are more of a visual person, I'm going to put 2 little apostrophes there so we know that that's the second one and we can distinguish those. Okay, if you are a visual person, feel free. You can highlight or draw down the y-axis for your line of reflection. Okay, J is what? 6 to the right, so J is going to move 6 to the left. K was 10, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. L was just 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, just like in step 7, all of these should be the exact same size and shape. Their orientation might change or they might be a mirror image, but it's as if we copied and pasted and maybe spun something around. We're not changing the size at all. The other thing I want to point out is you don't necessarily need the middle part, like the blue one for mine. You could just do the very beginning and the very end. I think the middle one is visually, it helps you kind of like, okay, that's part 1, and then we got to also do part 2. If you don't need it, like you just want to write out your points up here and then graph the starting and the end, that's okay. No need to do the blue one. I just like to do it because it's kind of like a checkpoint for me. Okay, let's keep moving. So we'll save the next one for maybe some practice in class. Okay, move down to this next one. Oops. Okay. So in example 1, okay, remember all of our triangles there for JKL were the exact same size and shape. So triangle JKL is congruent to triangle J prime, K prime, L prime. And that one was congruent to J double prime, K double prime, L double prime, okay? So it all fits from their transitive property that the very beginning and the very end are the same, right? They're the exact same size and shape, angles, sides, everything. So these are the same. Okay, so let's try one more different, not a glide reflection, just a regular one. This one is actually, so we're just graphing our a segment here. So C is at -7, 1, and D is at -3, 2. So let's go ahead and graph that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, -3, 2. All right. So there's our original. The first thing we're going to do is reflect over the x-axis. Okay, so if you are one that likes your shortcuts, if we're reflecting over the x-axis, we change the sign of our y's. If you'd rather just highlight your line of reflection and reflect it, that's okay too. Okay, C is going to move to -7, -1, or if it's 1 above, it's moving 1 below, which matches those coordinates. D is going to move to -3, -2, which again, 2 above, 2 below, and again matches. And we'll connect our little triangle. Okay. And then part 2 would be we are rotating 90 degrees. 90 degrees. So if you think back to your rotations, okay, this is one of our trickier ones. We got to keep 90 and 270 straight. So for a 90-degree rotation, we are going to switch our x and y's, but we do have to change the y coordinate, and then we switch them. So change the sign of y, and then they switch places. So C prime, right? Remember, we're always starting with the new figure, not going back to the original. So if we change the sign of y, that would become -7, 1, and then they switch. So 1, -7. Okay, and then same thing for D. Switch the sign of your y, so -2 becomes +2, and then they switch places. So 2, -3. Let's go ahead and graph that, and we can check our work. So 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. C's all the way down here. And 2, -3. Okay, so a couple things we can do to check our work on our rotation. One, is the segment the same length? And we can tell because they're like 4 blocks apart, but 1 block down. And that's the same thing here for our orange one. The other thing is if we're rotating 90 degrees, remember that's a counterclockwise rotation. So if our original points were sitting in quadrant 3, 1 quadrant counterclockwise would put us in quadrant 4. Okay, so we know that we did that. Okay. All right, so thank you for watching. That is part 1, and I will see you in part 2.